The man who walked into Harlow and Reeves' accounting on a Tuesday afternoon didn't knock. Nobody told Vivica Strand he was coming. Nobody told her anything, which was, she had learned in 3 years at the firm, entirely by design. The partners operated on a strict need-to-know basis, and junior accountants, particularly the ones who kept their heads down, wore cardigans in July, and ate lunch at their desks, were categorically deemed to not need to know. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps. Those were near unsettling. For a man, she would later learn, weighed 220 pounds of enforced discipline. She heard the silence he brought with him. The low-grade office hum, keyboards, the gurgling coffee machine, Darren from receivables, humming something tuneless. All of it simply stopped, like a radio signal cutting out. Vivica looked up from her spreadsheet. He was standing in the glass-walled corridor that divided the open floor from the partners' offices, flanked by 2 men who had the particular stillness of people who had learned to be invisible while being very large. The man himself was not trying to be invisible at all. He wore a charcoal suit that had not been purchased off any rack she had ever seen, his dark hair swept back with the kind of effortlessness that costs a great deal of effort. His jaw was set. His eyes, even from across the floor, were the color of deep water in November. That flat, pressurized gray that doesn't invite swimming. Casimir Vrede. She knew the name the way everyone in certain financial circles of Toronto knew it. In the abstract, the way you know a weather system is forming somewhere in the Atlantic, you track it. You don't expect it to land on your desk. He turned his head, and for one terrible second, his gaze crossed the room and landed directly on her. Vivica dropped her eyes to her spreadsheet. Her heart was doing something embarrassing. She didn't meet him properly until the following Thursday, which was enough time for her to convince herself that the eye contact had been incidental and entirely meaningless, and not nearly enough time to prepare for the reality of being in the same room as him. The partners had rented out Devereaux, one of those downtown restaurants where the lighting was designed to make everyone look either wealthy or dying, and the menu described things like sunchoke velouté without a trace of irony. Vivica was there because she'd made the mistake of being genuinely good at her job, which meant Harlow had decided to parade her in front of the client. Our most precise analyst, Graham Harlow said, gesturing to her with the kind of benevolent pride a man reserves for a well-trained golden retriever. Casimir Vrede did not extend his hand. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, with a long, deliberate assessment that missed nothing and volunteered nothing in return. His gaze moved over her face to Stesson, then dropped, briefly, to take in the rest of her. The burgundy wrap dress she'd agonized over for 40 minutes that morning. The fact that she was, unmistakably, a large woman in a room full of people who considered that a personal failing. Precise, he repeated. His voice was low, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't quite place, Eastern European, softened by years somewhere cold and English-speaking. Is that what we're calling it? It was not a question. Vivica felt the heat climb up her throat before she could stop it. It's what the numbers call it, she said. I just write them down. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, nothing so generous. More like a crack in glass that hasn't yet decided whether to hold or shatter. Graham Harlow laughed, too loud and too fast, and steered the conversation elsewhere. Vivica spent the rest of the dinner cataloguing exits. She told herself it didn't bother her. She was practiced at telling herself things didn't bother her. She'd been doing it since she was 12 years old, and realized that the world had a very specific set of opinions about the kind of space a body like hers was entitled to occupy. She had built entire internal architecture out of that practice. Rooms she didn't visit. Doors she kept locked. What she did instead of bothering was work. The Vrede account was a labyrinth. Shell companies nested inside holding companies, assets distributed across 4 jurisdictions, a paper trail that looked at first glance perfectly legitimate, and at second glance like an extremely sophisticated magic trick. Vivica was not supposed to look too closely. She understood this, in the way she understood most things that were never explicitly said. Through implication, through the slight tension in Graham Harlowe's voice when he handed her the files, through the way her NDA had been 3 pages longer than usual. She looked anyway, not out of recklessness, out of the kind of person who cannot leave a thing half understood. She needed to see the shape of it. She needed to know what she was holding. What she found buried in a subsidiary 4 layers down was a discrepancy, $11 million, routed in a direction that made no structural sense for the stated purpose of the account. It could have been an error. It could have been intentional. It was, either way, the kind of thing that got people into serious trouble with the Canada Revenue Agency, or, depending on who you were, the kind of trouble that made the CRA look like the easier option. Vivica sat with it for 2 days. She ate lunch at her desk. She did not sleep particularly well. She ran the numbers 6 different ways, and all 6 ways arrived at the same place. Then she closed the file, put it in the locked drawer of her desk, and went home. She was not, she told herself firmly, going to be the woman who disappeared over an $11 million discrepancy she hadn't created and hadn't been asked to find. Casimir Vrede called her personally on a Friday afternoon. She knew it was him before she answered. Her phone showed an unknown number, but something in the quality of the silence on the second ring told her. She answered anyway, because she had never in her life been able to leave a thing unanswered. Mrs. Strand. Not a question. He knew she'd picked up. Mr. Vrede. A pause. She could hear very faintly the ambient sound of somewhere high up. Wind, maybe, or the particular hum of a floor so far above street level that the city below became theoretical. I'd like you to come to a meeting Monday morning, he said. My office, 8 a.m. I'll need to clear it with Mr. Harlowe. I've already spoken with Harlowe. Of course he had. Then I'll be there, she said. Another pause. This one had weight to it, the weight of something being considered and then, apparently, set aside. You found something, he said, in the files. Her stomach tightened. She kept her voice very even. I find things in files every day, Mr. Vrede. That's the job. This was different. She did not confirm. She did not deny. She waited, which was something she was considerably better at than most people gave her credit for. Monday, he said, and hung up. Vivica sat with her phone in her hand for a full minute before she put it down and went back to work. His office occupied the entire top floor of a building on Bay Street that looked, from the outside, like every other steel and glass tower in that corridor of the city. The lobby, however, had the particular stillness of a place that took security seriously enough to make it invisible. The man who met her at the elevator didn't introduce himself. He led her through a set of doors that opened without him touching anything, down a hallway lined with nothing. No art, no furniture. Just white walls and grey carpet and the low, almost inaudible hum of ventilation. And into a corner office that was, somehow, exactly what she had expected and nothing like it. The view was the whole city, flung out below them like something that had been dropped and hadn't finished falling. The desk was a slab of pale wood, so clean it looked unused. There were 2 chairs, both facing the window rather than each other. Casimir Vrede was standing with his back to the door, looking out. He did not turn immediately. She suspected, without much bitterness, that this was deliberate, that he was a man who had spent considerable time cultivating the effect his entrance, or non-entrance, had on people. She sat down in one of the chairs, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. After approximately 45 seconds, she counted, he turned. You sat down, he said. There were chairs, she said. It seemed like the intended use. That crack in the glass again. Something in his jaw that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it, the way a winter storm is adjacent to silence. He crossed to the desk, and sat behind it, unhurried, and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. It was the kind of look that was meant to make a person fold, to make them rush to fill the silence with something, anything, that would give him information. Viveka had been looked at that way by accountants, by professors, by a particular kind of man at a particular kind of party, and she had learned, over many years, to simply look back. She looked back. "The discrepancy," he said. "I'm not sure what discrepancy you're referring to," she said pleasantly. "Monsieur Strand, Mr. Vrid." He set his hands flat on the desk. His hands were not soft. She noticed that, the way you notice things that contradict the story you've been telling yourself. There was a scar across the back of his left hand, old and faded, running from his index finger to his wrist. "You found $11 million in an account that shouldn't have it," he said. "I want to know what you did with that information." "I did my job," she said. "I documented what I found as required by the engagement terms. And I kept it confidential, as also required by the engagement terms." Silence. "You didn't flag it. I'm a contractor, Mr. Vreed. I flag things to the partners. What the partners do with that information is above my pay grade." It was, she was privately aware, a masterful non-answer. It was also entirely true, which was the part that gave her the most comfort. He studied her for a long time. She was very aware, during that time, of how she looked, large and still in the expensive chair, her dark hair pinned back, wearing a blazer that was good quality and well-fitted, and had taken her 40 minutes to find, because the world of professional women's clothing had a persistent and specific loathing for her particular body. She was aware of all of it, and she kept her face entirely neutral, and she waited. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It came out, sounding faintly puzzled, which she suspected was not an emotion Casimir Vrede permitted himself often. "Should I be?" "Most people are. Most people," she said carefully. "Haven't spent 7 years auditing corporations. After a while, everything starts to look like a balance sheet. Debits and credits. Things that cancel out. And what am I?" His voice had shifted, not warmer, exactly, but more present, as though he had been standing slightly behind himself and had moved forward. "A very complicated set of accounts," she said, "that someone has gone to considerable trouble to make look simple." The silence that followed this was different from the ones before it. It had texture. It had the feeling of a room after a window has been opened. Casimir Vrede leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd walked in, something in his face released. Barely. A degree of tension somewhere around his eyes that she hadn't consciously registered until it was gone. "Monday mornings," he said. 8 a.m. until the audit is complete. You'll work from here. I have other clients. Harlow has been compensated. She looked at him. You do understand, she said slowly, that buying my time is not the same as buying my conclusions. I know, he said. She wasn't sure, entirely, what to make of that. She picked up her bag. Then I'll see you Monday, she said, and stood and walked out and did not let herself exhale until the elevator doors had closed behind her. The next 4 weeks were the strangest of her professional life. She arrived at 8, as agreed. A coffee appeared on the desk within 10 minutes of her arrival every morning. Black, which was not what she drank, but she didn't say so until the 3rd day, and when she did, the next morning, there was a flat white with oat milk, which was exactly what she would have ordered, and which no one had asked her about. She did not see Casimir Vrede every day. Some days he was simply not there. His absence announced by the particular quality of stillness in the office, the way his PA, a sharp-eyed man named Oliver, held himself differently when his employer was out. On the days he was present, he moved through the floor with the focused economy of a man who had long since stopped wasting motion on anything that didn't require it. He came to look at her work twice a week. He stood at her shoulder and looked at her screen, which should have been uncomfortable and was, but not for the reasons she expected. He asked good questions, pointed, specific, occasionally uncomfortable questions that revealed a grasp of financial structure. She had not anticipated from a man whose legitimate business interests were understood to be partly decorative. "You understand this better than you let on," she said, on the second week. "People tell you things when they think you don't understand," he said. "Is that what you're doing with me?" He looked at her. "No," he said. She didn't know what to do with that either. She found the second discrepancy on a Wednesday. This one was not 11 million. This one was smaller, more precisely targeted, and considerably more dangerous. The kind of thread you pull without knowing it's attached to the entire structure. And then you feel the tension through your fingers and you understand, suddenly, that you are holding something very fragile and very heavy, and that putting it down carefully requires more skill than picking it up ever did. She had it mapped out by 4 in the afternoon. She sat with it for an hour. Then she sent Oliver a message asking to see Mr. Vred before she left. He came to the doorway of her borrowed office and leaned against the frame. He didn't enter. She had noticed he rarely entered a room fully, unless he intended to hold it. "Someone inside your organization," she said without preamble, "has been quietly redirecting funds from 3 different accounts into a 4th that routes out through a numbered company in Luxembourg. They've been doing it for approximately 18 months. The amounts are small enough individually to avoid threshold reporting. Collectively," she turned her screen toward him, "it's approximately 4 million, give or take." He looked at the screen. She watched his face. Whatever he was feeling, it was controlled with the kind of precision that didn't come naturally. It was learned, the same way she had learned to keep her voice flat when she was being looked at in rooms like this one. "Do you know who?" he said. "I have a strong hypothesis," she said. "I'd want another 24 hours to be certain. Who else knows about this?" "No one. I work alone." She paused. "Which is, I suspect, why Yui insisted on it." He looked at her then, not the long assessing look of the first meeting, not the careful professional regard of the last few weeks. This was something else. Direct. Present. Like he had finally stopped keeping her at the distance he kept everything. "You didn't have to tell me," he said. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did. It puts you in a position." "Mr. Vreed." She closed the laptop. "Everything about this engagement has put me in a position. I walked into it with my eyes open because I'm good at what I do, and because walking away from something I don't understand is not something I'm physically capable of." She picked up her coat. "I'll have the confirmation for you tomorrow." She was at the door when he said, quietly, "Viveka." It was the first time he had used her given name. She stopped. "Be careful," he said. "Going home tonight." She turned to look at him. He was still leaning against the doorframe, and there was something in the way he held himself. A tension that hadn't been there before, coiled and watchful. That told her this was not a general pleasantry. "Should I be concerned?" she asked. "I'll have someone follow at a distance," he said. "You won't see them." She absorbed this. The professional, sensible part of her understood it was an imposition, a presumption, evidence of a world operating by entirely different rules than the ones she had agreed to live by. The other part of her, the part she did not visit often, noted that it was also, in its strange and dangerous way, the most careful anyone had been with her in a very long time. "All right," she said, and left. The man who had been taking the money was named Dennis Falk, mid-level, accounts management, 12 years with the organization's legitimate holding arm. The kind of person who had spent so long being invisible that he had begun to believe invisibility was the same as invulnerability. He was also Viveka, established by 10 the next morning, working with someone outside who had been feeding him information about audit schedules, which meant someone had known she was being brought in, which meant the redirections, which had slowed in the last 3 weeks, had slowed deliberately. She compiled everything into a report that was precise and thorough, and entirely without the kind of conclusion that could be misconstrued as accusation. Facts, She noted patterns. She indicated without stating what those patterns implied. She brought it to Casimir Vrade's office at 11. He read it without interrupting. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the desk and was quiet for a moment. And she understood, watching him, that what she was seeing was not anger, or not only anger, but the particular look of a man recalibrating, adjusting his picture of the world to accommodate information that had shifted it. "How long," he said, "before this becomes a problem I can't manage quietly?" "That depends entirely on what Mr. Falk does next," she said. "If he suspects he's been found, he may move to protect himself in ways that make managing it quietly more complicated. Does he suspect?" "I was careful," she said simply. He looked at her. "You've done this before." "Not this," she said, "but the shape of it. Finding things people have hidden in places they were certain no one would look." "Why?" he asked. "Not professionally. Why does someone like you?" He stopped himself. The sentence had been going somewhere he hadn't intended. She waited to see if he would finish it. He looked out the window. "Someone who could be anywhere," he said, "doing safe work. Why take an engagement like this?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm better than the safe work," she said, "and I spent a very long time pretending otherwise." She paused. "And because I don't think the people I work for should be allowed to decide what I'm capable of based on what I look like." The quiet that followed was a specific kind of quiet. She had not meant to say that last part. Or she had meant it, but not to him, not here, not in this room, where the whole city hung below them like a backdrop to some argument she hadn't started. "No," he said. His voice was low. "They shouldn't." She met his eyes. He didn't look away. Dennis Falk made his move 2 days later, a series of rapid transfers beginning at 6:47 a.m., which Vivica caught because she had set an alert on the accounts 3 days prior, and her phone woke her before her alarm did. She was sitting up in bed, in the dark of her apartment on Dovercourt Road, reading the notification with the particular calm of someone who been waiting for exactly this. She called Casimir Vrade. He answered on the first ring. "It's moving," she said. "I see it." He had clearly been awake. "How much can you stop from your end? I can freeze the routing on 2 of the 3 accounts within the next 8 minutes if you give me authorization on the 3rd. You have it." No hesitation. None. She was already at her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keys with the steady efficiency she had spent 7 years building, much later, after the transfers had been halted. And the total damage had been contained to something manageable, and the grey of early morning had turned to proper daylight, that she let herself feel how thoroughly her hands had been shaking. He came to her apartment that afternoon. She had not expected this. She had expected a phone call, perhaps, or an email, or silence, the particular silence of a job concluded, and a person returned to their appropriate category. She had been in the middle of making tea and had answered the door in her socked feet and a cardigan she'd had for 6 years, and he was standing in the hallway of her very ordinary building on Dovercourt Road, looking, for the first time in her experience of him, like a man who didn't have a script. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You stopped it," he said. "We stopped it," she corrected. "You had eyes on Falk. I had eyes on the money. It required both." He stepped inside, which she registered as significant because, as she had observed over 4 weeks, Casimir Vrade did not enter rooms he didn't intend to hold. She stepped back to make space for him, and he stood in her small entrance hallway, surrounded by her coats and her bookshelf, and the slightly lopsided print she'd bought at a market on Ossington 2 winters ago, and had never quite gotten around to hanging properly. He looked at the print. "It's crooked," he said. "I know," she said. "I keep meaning to fix it." He reached up and straightened it. His hands were steady. She watched him do it with the feeling of someone watching something slightly out of place in their own life, in the way that's disorienting not because it's wrong, but because it's unexpectedly right. "Sit down. I'll make tea." She was not sure why she said it. She was even less sure why he sat. They sat at her kitchen table, which had a stack of books on one end that she hadn't moved in 3 weeks, and he drank the tea she made, black, because she had learned by now that was how he took it, and outside the window the city was doing its ordinary afternoon things, traffic and pigeons, and a siren somewhere east of them, winding down. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had not expected that either. "For which part?" she asked. "The dinner," he said. "At Devereux, the first night." "I was." He stopped. The word seemed to cost him something. Dismissive. "You were," she agreed. "I was wrong." She looked at him. He was not, she noticed, saying, "I'm sorry you felt dismissed," or "that wasn't my intention." The ways people apologized when they wanted the form of an apology, or without the content of one. He was saying he was wrong. Straightforwardly. The way a person says it when they have spent some time knowing it, and have decided that saying it is the correct next step. "Yes," she said. "You were." He met her eyes. "You didn't walk away, I rarely do." "I know," he said. "I've been paying attention." The afternoon light came through her kitchen window at an angle that made the table look warmer than it was, and Vivica Strand thought about all the rooms she'd learned not to enter, all the doors she kept locked because the cost of opening them had always seemed, on balance, greater than what might be on the other side. She thought about that for a moment. Then she set down her mug. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've been paying attention too." Outside, the city continued its afternoon indifference, which is one of the things cities are best at, proceeding with complete unconcern while something that matters is clouds and windows. At a kitchen table, over tea, between two people who had each, in their separate and armored ways, gotten very good at not being known, Casimir Vrede set down his mug. He reached across the table, unhurried, the way he did everything, with the deliberate calm of a man who had learned that speed was not the same as strength, and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm. She did not pull away.